Alright guys, so we're going to be going into the second rematch here. Funnily enough, this is exactly what happened last week on What If Wednesdays. We had his EVP, and the Zerg lost twice, and then won the final game, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so on the second rematch. And the funny thing is that's kind of, I think, something you often see with Zerg players is as a very defensive race that learns to like absorb and deflect the damage and then get out on the map and counterattack. It's something where Zerg players are always trying to like learn throughout the process. Three, two. I love that countdown with the recover game. All right. So looking at this stage, we're back at 6 minutes 30, 15 seconds before when we started last game. The Hydra Den's down. I think he just cancelled the Spire. So I think it had already started even at 6:30. That's fine. Warp Prism's being annoying. Let's hope he remembers the Overseer amidst everything else we talked about. Yeah, he does. Where is it? I just clicked it and it zoomed me to here. He's making an Overseer somewhere. Anyway, he'll see what's going on. Interestingly, Puck going to be warping in a whole lot of Adepts here. This is like Puck's power. Puck's ability to just change game to game and like do so many different types of aggression to throw Zerg off. Like, Puck understands how to piss a Zerg player off. There's like one thing Puck understands so well. Like, look, he's got Blink Adepts. He's using the Warp Prism to blink them back. This is just like, seriously, man? And he just changes it up each time. So like, I think Puck is also like the worst person to do this scenario against because he just completely changes like his game plan from one moment to the next. We are seeing more Banelings made, more Hydras, more Lings though. So at the same time, I think TLO is in an okay position. There's a fourth Nexus going down behind this. Oh no, the Baneling detonations weren't very good. I know Dario's going to be a bit annoyed at that micro, but nonetheless, he's going to get on top of this. And he's going to say, how do you like them trades, boy? So this time around, oh no, here come more units. I think Puck's just going to kill him. What the hell, Puck? Puck just keeps on attacking and catching him out with these timings. Damn. That early Adept warp in just changed everything. It just took such a good trade. Bloody Puck, man. Alright, we're gonna have to get Puck on after this, because now he's already done enough damage. Like, just forcing those Adepts to get the trade going then. Interestingly enough, I was going to talk a little bit about potentially TLO's economy and kind of analyze that. So when we get them both onto Analyze after this game, I'm going to open up the replay and kind of check some benchmarks with TLO's economy build-up and how it went and generally how the game had gone. Because right now I feel like TLO is just behind. Even though he's got better upgrades, I feel like he just doesn't quite have enough stuff, so... Yeah, Puck's always like pushing and taking the start of a good fight, and then as the lurkers get in position, he like repositions, so... This is really tough for TLO to find his footing again. Puck's like very good at bullying his way around this matchup. We might need to actually restart from a little bit earlier, potentially. However, sometimes we just see that we were bad at identifying what the mistakes were. I do think if Puck played precisely the same, these adjustments we'd be talking about would be making a bit of a better difference. Oh, he's gonna get caught down there. He's doing big damage in the natural. He's killed 12 workers in total this game, but nice force fields to zone out those lurkers and hydras. He's still doing some damage there. And TLO's down to just 60 drones. Oh man, there's even Adepts down here. Puck is just all over the place. He's got the fourth up. He's got Immortal production. Storm's almost finished. Warping in more Stalkers. Disruptor Bay's on the way. And it looks like Puck is just going to crush it, man. So Puck here really just showing that, look, I had enough economy. I had enough units. I think I can just roll over you every game. And maybe the openings just went too well for Puck. Maybe TLO's opening just wasn't good enough economically. And maybe that's something we actually need to be looking at here. So I really am keen to get both players in to have the discussion, because I see this game is over. Like, it's so over. There's nothing TLO can do to get back in this game. And I really want to get Puck in here and hear his opinions on, you know... And if he just says anything like, oh, I don't really know, I just win games like this, we're going to ask him, well, what do the games feel like when you lose when you're doing this sort of style? How does that work out? Okay, so that was pretty brutal, that last one, but that's just how it happens sometimes. And you kind of realize, wait, we need to go back earlier in the game to figure out where we could have been. So I've just got to get the call sorted. Because it is a group call, and group calls are really confusing ever since Skype changed up everything. So we can... I think maybe I need to pay for premium or something. I don't even know how Skype works. I really hate Skype, but I think I'll start using Discord in future after today's session, as more people start to swap over to that app. But okay, just trying to get this call through. Hey.
Hello.
Hey, so sorry, the group call's a bit of a pain. Can you add TLO to the call? And while you get that sorted, we will have a think about a few of the different things that could go on. So has Puck accepted your request yet?
I didn't send a request. What's this?
Oh, can you add him? Can you add him to friends? Sorry, I added you guys to a group conversation, so you should be able to see
You
him in
did?
there.
I don't see anything.
Skype. That's cool. Send contact. Here we go.
Okay, that works.
Sweet. Yeah. And have you used Discord before, Dario?
I have not, but I heard it's good.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start using that in future, and just like, I just fear getting some pros to use it, because I know how uncoordinated I am at using new things, so.
Yeah, but it's not that, it's just laziness, because it's the same with like Facebook. Facebook is awful, like
Oh, yeah.
terrible. But because everybody already was on Facebook, you don't want to start something new, because then everybody you know would need to also sign up. And Skype is the same. Skype is the worst shit ever. Just because it's been there and everybody is on there. It's like everybody's just gonna stay on it.
Exactly.
Kind of like political parties.
Exactly. So do you have the option to add Puck into the call by any chance?
I should have that option.
I think it's work. Wait, Drogo? How the shit? What did I just click on? Whoops. Let me get that going again. I accidentally added Drogo to that. Sorry, I accidentally added Drogo to that. I don't know how I did that. I could have sworn I clicked Puck. No. There we go. Okay, we're getting it going. We're getting it going! Oh my god, finally. So, Puck should be receiving that call now.
Are we? Or...
Okay, that's cool. So right now we're just going to take turns talking about it. So while I try to fix that, because I don't know what the hell is going on there, because it's not working. Let me see. So can you try just going add to conversation, add people, or
yeah, let me try.
Add to call, and we'll try and get that going while Skype continues to be its irritating self. And if that doesn't work, that's fine. We'll just talk separately, as bad as that is.
I think this should be working.
Looks like it. So anyway, while that happens, so that game, he just kind of warped into depths even earlier and just kept pushing. So what I felt like was maybe he was just a little bit ahead in terms of economy. Do you feel
Yeah,
like that? That's kind of the feeling I got.
I feel like the early game just didn't go as well as it should have. Maybe I wasn't greedy enough. I mean, I don't know. It's right now it's so scary against the 3 gateway Twilight expand because he played it very defensively, right? So I
Yeah.
made quite a few links and bane links because you kind of have to. But then he didn't do anything until he had a War Prism, and then he did a little bit of damage from that. Also, probably damage in the sense that I started making a few mistakes, and I was probably just a little bit too far behind. Like, not that it was unrecoverable, but I'm watching the replay now and I want to see what the situation was.
Yeah, I've loaded up the replay as well. So something I noticed was, yeah, you do go for very fast upgrades with your build, and that's always going to slow your economy down a little bit, but that's not like massive. Likewise, you go for the pretty fast second gas, but it's not like you're going for that stuff on top of Overlord speed. Like the classic Dark build is a build which just like kind of wrecks your economy, right? It's really really harsh, but this isn't that. You do skip the Overlord speed, so that you're only getting the melee, the fast Baneling Nest, and the second gas. What timing did you put your second gas down? I mean, sorry, not
like,
your second. No, that's like 3:30, right? 3:20.
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like
yeah.
that. What about your Baneling Nest? Do you normally put that down about?
Yeah, that was like, I basically make the second gas and the baneling nest, just about.
Okay. Do you feel like
I
that
don't think,
Baneling Nest
I
is
don't
maybe
think
too early? Like, do you really
No,
need it
I
so
think-
fast?
I think the baneling nest is fine.
And you made a whole
I'm not-
eight Banelings as well. That seems like a lot of Banelings.
Yeah, I think I made
You-
I made too many banelings without seeing. I mean,
You-
it's always tricky against adepts because if you make a few too little banelings and you don't manage to like initially wipe out the first wave, what we talked about earlier, it's really hard.
Yeah. However,
But
if they are only going 3 gate, I think you can probably get away with 5.
Like 5 banelings.
Yeah, like as standard. And you did have the scouting information, so there should be like a trigger where when you see that he's got a third base on the normal timing, which you saw pretty early, like you should immediately know, right? You should be able to say to yourself, like, okay, we only need 5 Banelings, but how many Zerglings would you normally make with those 5 Banelings? Like 20? 15?
Well, I mean, it's not entirely clear because I didn't see the robo. This could have been quick 5 gates as well, rather than the prism or something like that. But
Yeah.
well, yeah, like 5 banes and like probably like about 20 links, then you're like super safe. But maybe that's a little bit too much. I don't know.
Cool. Is
I'm
Puck,
not-
is
I-
Puck there now,
I'm-
by the way?
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, we
Yeah,
can hear
now-
you.
yeah, yeah.
Hey. Sorry, that wasn't working before. Sorry for cutting you off there, Dario. Continue. What were you saying? Let you finish
I
your
mean,
thoughts.
I'm not entirely sure yet because this is like the variation that is kind of new what Protoss is doing yet. So I'm still not done like exactly to the numbers what I want to do. But yeah, about 5 banes and 20 links, then you're like really safe. But against the variation he played with the prism, you probably want to have a little bit less actually.
Yeah. So Puck, what about you? Only made 4 adepts this game. With your very initial pressure, was that a specific reaction to something, or you just kind of felt like being more defensive this game?
Well, I mean, like, you don't necessarily have to warp in attacks unless the Zerg's or adepts unless the Zerg's going to attack you, right? So it's better to have like defense against Overlord Bane drops than it is to have adepts. So just having like initial pressure with adepts is really good to keep the Zerg at their toes, and then if they try to counter pressure, you'll have units ready to deal with any baneling drops because baneling drops can just end games as well. So
Oh yeah. That's interesting because I almost always see people, if they go for this build, like always commit to a minimum of 6 or 7 adepts. Like, I've never actually seen someone just stop at 4 and kind of supercharge their macro a little bit like you,
well,
because it was a bit.
I feel like I
different.
come a little bit later, so it's like if I warp in adepts later, they're more than likely gonna have more units to deal with it. So it's just like I don't know. I don't feel comfortable because
Yeah.
like the thing is like when you're taking a third, they might be making a bunch of units as well.
Because normally
Trying
you'd
to
hit
deny.
like 4 minutes 40, 4 minutes 42, 45 with your 6 or 7 glaive adepts, right? If you were just committing straight to the attack, or maybe even 8 adepts. But you're only halfway across the map with 4 adepts at 4 minutes 50. So even though it kind of looks like the same build and it forces the same response, it is just a much more calmer and more defensive way of doing it. And you start building your sentries very early as well. So that kind of makes you a lot safer in the follow-up, right?
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah, I really like this variation with only the 4 adepts because I feel it forces out as many units almost as like the 6 or 8 adepts if you have like 4 with a prism.
Yeah, this is very hard for the Zerg to read, so cutting a few Banelings is definitely going to help. However, I definitely think what we've got to look for, this is like one of those ones where we've seen Puck play like a very unhindered early game, right? Which is very standard for ZVP, right? Just due to, you know, the Mothership core and the power of kind of Adepts early on. So I think this is probably one of those games, right, where it is a new style, and whenever you deal with one of these new styles, which we feel forces a big response, usually the thing you've got to figure out, especially for Zerg players, but it kind of goes for every race, is how to cut as many corners as possible while still staying safe, right? So it's kind of like this very somewhat tedious process for pros of like figuring out how can I be slightly more ahead? How can I delay this gas by like 20 seconds or this Baneling nest by 30 seconds here or there? So I've loaded up the replay in the better format so I can actually check out those timings. So if you don't mind, I want to just talk about or take a look at your kind of second gas and Evo and Baneling nest timing, because something I notice is that just generally it's so easy, especially if we overcommit to defense or we take a little bit of damage. If we take our gas even a little bit too early or our upgrades so early, then things can go wrong pretty quickly in the matchup. So in this game, you did go your second gas at 3 minutes 20 in your natural, and then the Baneling nest at 3 minutes 50. Now that means your Baneling nest is ready, so let's check. At 4 minutes 27. So that's a good time Baneling nest, right? Because then if you morph Baneling straight away, a Baneling takes 14 seconds to finish. It means your Banelings are done morphing by just after 4 minutes 40. So even the most committed Adept attack timing, you'll have your Banelings ready in position, which we were talking about earlier is so important, because if you're not in position, they can kind of shade past, get behind your mineral lines. Then by the time your Banelings get on top of them, they've spread out, or then they shade somewhere else. And your Banelings can't take efficient trades unless you get on top of the Adepts immediately. So
Yeah,
the Baneling nest
timing was
timing,
good.
that's good.
I feel like I just want to delay my +1 though. Like, Protoss have become so good at playing this build that the +1 melee probably hurts you more than it helps you. Because it's not gonna help with the initial Adept weapon anyway. It's gonna help a little bit later. But by that time, probably the pressure is over already. Like, Protoss used to play Adept pressure much more committed.
Yeah.
And now they just get the Nexus behind it and get the, like, massive eco like really quickly. So probably delaying my upgrade a little bit more is reasonable.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I mean, because everything else you did with your economy, I can't argue with. I keep looking for these holes in it. For instance, the next thing I naturally look, and I'm sure you sometimes, when you were first, a long time ago, figuring out your legacy builds, would look at is like, oh, am I maybe taking gas too early? But no, you're waiting till both your natural and third are basically both fully saturated, and only then are you going past your initial 2 gas geysers, which is like, that's like the general rule of ZVP. Like, you're never going to have a big enough economy unless you saturate all 3 mineral lines before you take your extra gas. But you wait for that, and then you steadily add those gases down. The 4th base is like is like not particularly fast, but I don't think that's necessarily the point of contention anyway, because in this sort of scenario, I think you'd agree, you very rarely get kind of much mining or production off that 4th base, even if you do get it sooner, before you have to build a lot of units, especially against Puck's sort of hard pushing style.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So cutting the +1 melee is something we've come to as a conclusion. Anything else you think you could cut in terms of getting another edge in the early game, or just so a few less Banelings, not getting the +1 melee every game? We talked about kind of swapping around the Hydra timing and the Spire timing. I actually wanted to ask Puck quickly. So Puck, you kind of changed up your aggression slightly from game to game. Was that because you kind of were listening to us analyze it and you were like, well, let's change it up to abuse that? Or were you just kind of like, just instinctively, let's just keep doing different things to throw the Zerg off?
I was listening to analysis when you were done.
That's cheating.
You cheater!
But no, like I just always kind of do weird timings every game. Like I never really repeat the same things that often. I don't feel unless it's like PVT and I'm doing Link Disruptor. But versus Zerg, I'm very random. I feel for the most part.
Yeah, it's because you can do so many good things.
It's true. I feel like you have a lot more options versus Zerg in the mid game, for as far as like the pressure goes, than say like a Terran player.
Yeah. I mean, Terran is always the same. Like, Protoss is scary at the moment because it feels like there's so many different variations of pressure.
Yeah,
Kind of like HOTS again.
yeah, for sure.
So
That's one of the beautiful things about PvZ though, is that there's just so many different things that can happen.
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like the matchup, when it's criticized, it's because it can be so drastically one way or the other so suddenly, and often if one player gets the tempo, they can very simply turn that into a win. But I feel like the range of build orders is definitely what gives it its excitement, as you said. Like, there's just so many openings for both sides, so much craziness. Though it does get frustrating, I think, as a Zerg player, as like there was the first few months, you're like, I am unstoppable, and then Protoss has gotten so good at defending now. You guys are getting so good at defending the silly Ling Queen drops and all that sort of stuff. So there's no more, not as many silly free wins on both sides of the table. It used to be you just sit on 2 base, mass adepts, and you could kill Zerg players, but everyone's gotten better at shutting down the basic builds now, and it's getting a lot more refined. Now, we were talking after the very first game, the big changes we talked about were getting rid of the Spire, delaying that until quite a bit later in the game, and going Lurkaden before the Hydra upgrades. Now, obviously that changes up. It makes your timings a lot more powerful. Sorry, what were you going to say, Dario?
No, Puck was gonna say something. Okay.
I feel on King Sejong Station that Hydras are really good. Like if you can get pressure going and then abuse the natural base, I mean, just always put pressure on that mineral line, you should do very well. Because it's really hard to engage that.
Yeah, but it's also really hard to actually move out with Hydras. For example, there's this nasty, we talked about that earlier, the Stalker Sentry push into the back rocks. If you don't have lurkers for that, it's very scary.
Yeah.
And then it's also just very scary to go up ramps. I mean, you don't really need to go up a ramp. I guess you could go around, but then it's pretty far.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess Hydras are good, but I feel like if Protoss plays it right, if he just matches your Hydras with Sentries and Stalkers, theoretically you should never be able to do much with that.
Yeah, but like if you can transition to Hydralisk and the Protoss is forced the Stalkers and
then you make the lurkers, yeah.
Like they're not gonna have like much follow up behind that, so.
So what's interesting there is Dario's talking about the idea of this push on the back rocks, right, being very scary, and just generally there's I guess quite a few areas, but that's the main one because you can always defend the front, as we saw Dario defending in these games with the big spread. He'd always, whenever you pushed in Park, he'd come in with that big flank and surround you down the bottom of his natural ramp. But on the back rocks, you can't do that against a Stalker Sentry push. However, I do like what Puck's saying about the idea of being aggressive with Hydras is really powerful if you can like get up in the aggressive positions, right? And I feel like that's kind of a theme of King Sejong in general, is if you're pushing forward, suddenly, even if you've got a smaller army, your opponent can't dislodge you. Like if you get on top of this ramp as Protoss or Zerg, it's very scary for the other player to push up that ramp out front your natural and third onto this high ground. Because you can get force fielded, you're going into a concave of Zerg units, like it's just an awkward position, and that allows the aggressive player to then start working in counterattacks, coming around and breaking down the back rocks and doing all sorts of that. The question is, how can you get into that point? And generally, let's just stay on that idea of the back rocks and this push, and I want to hear Puck's opinion. That's a strong push. TLO says he feels he needs lurkers for it. Do you think if he just built more Hydras and Lings and could fight a bit further down beyond the rocks in the open area, towards like the back rocks fourth base, that potential fourth base location, do you think Hydra Ling would just be able to defend Stalker Sentry pushes there, Puck?
I feel like it's really hard to utilize Lings on this map because it's like there's always a choke point where like on each side, the middle, the left, the right, it's very easy to relatively deal with things if you know that they're coming because it doesn't really take that many force fields. And the thing is like you can force field in front of you, deal with the Lings, and then go back to the other army. So it's just like I don't necessarily think Lings are the best answer. Maybe like earlier in the game they're okay to like apply pressure with, but like going into the mid and late game, Lings aren't very good. I don't think in this.
Okay, that's an interesting point. What do you think, TLO?
I'm not sure if I agree with that. It's so hard to play completely lingless against armies like that.
Yeah, of course.
You don't have like any mobility at all, and it's talking about like pressuring with Hydras. I feel it's very hard, especially if Protoss opens early Prism like you do. Like, realistically, I always need to keep probably at least 10 or 12 supply at home to like defend against the Prism. So that's why I like feel the Lurker option is better, because it actually gives you a strong like mid to late game push, rather than the Hydra pressure would come at a point so early that leaving units at home to defend against a Prism would really cripple the timing, I feel.
I'm not necessarily like it has to be a timing, but like if you can get the aggressive point and just have the position, like you don't necessarily have to end the game. You just have to keep that position.
I guess just prevent you from taking the fourth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something when we saw Nurtio playing in tours. He was, whenever he wanted to go for the more aggressive drop-based style, he'd always open up with the Hydra upgrades first to try and get position out on the map and threaten a bit before going for the lurkers. And I'm not saying that's definitely always the right thing to do, but it's just interesting because he'd always go for the faster lurker den if he was going for just like the fastest possible lurker push. But whenever he wanted to kind of control the middle stage a little bit more, and then get kind of ready to push back the Protoss's vision so he could attack from multiple angles or abuse the positioning on the map, he'd always go for those upgrades first. And I definitely think it's always still going to be slightly awkward, but I keep thinking about like the potential push angles. And I mean, I think as Zerg, if you can get up onto that high ground out front the Protoss's bases around, say, the 7-minute mark with Hydraling, then it's very hard for Protoss to push out into you, right? It is quite scary, even if you aren't committing completely crazily to your push. And I'm kind of with TLO on the Zergling point, that I think Zerglings you always need in your army, right? If you're going like a Lurker Hydra-based style. But maybe not mass Zerglings, like, as the plan. But definitely you've got to have Zerglings coming in, and it all comes down to how you engineer the battles, right? If you're fighting just front on in one of these kind of chokier areas, the Lings aren't going to do a lot. So as the Zerg player, like you can't really force your way through the chokes in this map. Likewise, you've got to defend before your opponent gets to the abusive chokes. Like the onus is on the Zerg to get out there and fight in the open area beforehand, or have your units ready to counterattack, to backstab and punish the Protoss when he tries to get into that position. Would you guys agree that that's a fair statement? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's not an incorrect analysis.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. It's just like there's so many variations of what you can actually do with everything. So it's just like there's multiple answers.
Spot on. Yeah.
And it depends on who you're playing and other shit.
Yeah, CVP is it's very stylistic. Like, CVP is a very strange matchup when it comes to that. There's like Protoss players that play kinda similar, but not quite. And one Protoss player I dominate, and the other I lose every single game. Even though, like, for the layman it looks almost the same, but it's just slight variations that change everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really cool. I think today's stream has been pretty interesting. I'm just opening up the first replay again. So I think we'll check a few questions in chat. I'll see if there's anything that's good there. See if you guys can help me answer those. While I get that checked. But to kind of summarize ourselves, we've kind of come to the point here today that because this is a new style, this glaive prism pressure, it's something which you're still trying to fully figure out exactly how to make the full perfect response that you can just do every game. Right, Dario? So you're just trying to kind of figure out exactly how to be super efficient. We feel like overall, there was definitely a few small things we could change in these games. We talked about going for the Lurker Den first. Right now, that's probably the main thing you're going to be doing in your ZVP matches, right? Like trying to explore that and think like, or at least on this map, most of the time going for that. trying to delay the Spire a little bit, but then there's also potentially delaying your upgrades a little bit. If this style keeps sticking around in the meta, saying, let's just go for the later Evo Chamber, maybe drop the Evo Chamber at 4 minutes or 4 minutes 30, whereas you've been dropping it at like 3 minutes 30, super early. Get a little bit more economy going. And then generally try to fight it out with just lots of very slight adjustments to positioning and composition, and just trying to have a few more units so that you can't be abused by these pressures. So it's very much just going to be one of those things where we can't just say, oh, it's just do this or just do that, because it's such a series of slight changes, and they change depending on what your opponent does. You know, we can talk about little things like have 3 less Banelings prepared when they come across with the Warp Prism. But then it's such a minor thing. And then if you start playing Protoss players who are always going for the 5 or 6 gateways, even after the 3rd Nexus is down, you're going to actually want to be making more Banelings and more Zerglings. So it really is like this balancing act. And I think that's also something which comes hand in hand with the Ling Bane style. I often recommend to like lower league players, for instance, like go Roaches against Protoss, because Ling Bane does take a bit of finesse to use. And you're going to see players not get the exact right engage, where the Banelings are going into the center of the Adepts, the Zerglings are capturing them, or they're 10 seconds late on morphing the Banelings, and the Adepts just get in and start to tear everything apart. So I think this is kind of a session where it's hard for, say, a low-level player watching to just kind of grab one easy thing as something to learn from. But hopefully just the process of us discussing and talking about the different strengths and kind of going through that formula of thinking like, well, what can we cut? Like, it seemed like Puck's attack was just too strong. So we just kind of went like, well, what can you cut to be a bit more efficient? Well, we can try delaying the Spire. We can try going faster Lurkers, slower Hydra upgrade. So we just kind of experimenting and shifting things around little bit by little bit. And I think for the viewers, it's kind of obvious that even you guys as pro gamers don't necessarily have like instantly like, oh, this is definitely the perfect answer. But it's a matter of experimentation and your experience kind of helping you explore and figure that out through hard practice and just kind of grinding it out and experimenting.
Yep. Legacy is a hard game.
So here's a good question, which I'll let you answer, TLO. Needsmore says, Pig, why is it that Zergs don't use Ravages in ZVP? Apart from hatch tech all-ins on Prion Terraces, we never see them nowadays.
Well, Protoss just got much better at defending them. I think that's the main answer. Like, they basically have a timed shelf life, because as soon as Ravagers, as soon as Disruptors are on the field, Ravagers just become terrible. Like, you can easily lose 600 to a single Disruptor shot, and if you're a bit unlucky. And they're just clunky. Like, you need to kill Protoss with a push, and the longer the game becomes, the worse Ravagers just become. So that's why I think. Yeah,
I gotta agree with that. Puck, I was watching your stream the other day. I see there's a lot of GM Zergs on NA though, still pretty keen on stopping at 30 to 40 drones and just making Ravagers and Zerglings and rallying them at you endlessly.
Yeah, NA Zerg players just do whatever they want. It's kind of frustrating.
It was some epic holds though. I remember watching multiple games where you wiped out every single drone in the Zerg's base with your Warp Prism. So even though you lost almost every probe, you'd have like an Immortal and an Adept standing at home, and you'd win the game with that and like 6 probes left or something. But I definitely agree with TLO. Like, Ravagers just need to get the damage done very fast. Now, there's still high-level players and pro gamers opening up with Roaches against Adept openings, a Laser, Nurtio. What you'll often see, though, is they don't get Roach speed, so they don't invest in the Roaches. And they might make a few Ravagers for, like, breaking force fields or fighting these sentry-based armies, but they're never investing in a lot of them, and it's only if they can spare the gas. Like, if they've got their Lurker Den finished, they're not going to be wasting gas on Ravagers. It's only if they need to make them to stop an early push. There's actually been so much chatter today that most of the chat has been cleared. So we've only got the most recent questions. But here's one from Strong Zonk. What if TLO had some extra queens for early defense? They can zone out the Prism and are easier to get than Hydras. They're also, you would get more creep spread, and that would have helped, I think, said Strong Zonk. So what are your thoughts on that, TLO?
Very hard to get more queens. I think 4 queens is pretty decent. My creep spread didn't look so bad. It was just that he killed the creep where it mattered, but having more queens wouldn't really have helped there. They're just really expensive. I mean, a single queen is like 3 drones worth of money. So, and they don't really help a whole lot against stalker-based armies. They can help a little bit in the early game against adepts, but again, like the longer the game goes, the less they help in fights. I mean, more queens is always good, but I just don't like the builds are so tight that I feel they're like a very low priority luxury item to get early on.
That's such a good way of putting it, because they're like that, all right? Like, you need everything to kind of fulfill a very tight purpose. And even if you think about an early adept attack, queens don't die to adepts. They will eventually
But they
beat
also
them.
don't deal with them. Yeah.
Exactly. So they can just dive past and start killing workers, and your queens will just be waddling after them, doing their like 4 damage in attack. Like, yeah, we'll kill you 10 minutes from now once all our drone line's dead. So if you think about it, you still need to invest in the Zergling defense, the Baneling defense, as well as the queens. So it's extra money, which you don't really have that early, and then it's not going to help you past a certain point to get aggressive on the map. If it was still like HOTS, where you were just going to turtle up to like maybe, you know, a bit later in the game, add Swarmos or Queen, Ultras or Broods or something, that would make sense. But those paces of the game, they're not powerful anymore for Zerg. You need to kind of really go out there and stop the Protoss getting a 4th in the mid game and try to stop them getting a 5th and really fight a lot there. So it's very much about kind of keeping on your toes and slowing them down. So the queens don't have as much of a place. However, if you're doing a more mineral heavy build, maybe you're doing some special gasless opening on, say, Olrina or something, where you can like wall off the choke point with a spine, maybe there's space for more queens in those scenarios, but definitely not with this build. All right, so not many questions for Puck, unfortunately. Everyone's like, well, Puck just killed Zerg today, so looks like not too many questions for you, unfortunately. Do you want to ask yourself a question, Puck?
I don't know what I'd ask myself. It's kind of just on the spot.
No worries. All right, so one more question. Just the last one, and it's for TLO again. And there's another question about Broodlords as well, so that this kind of answers both. But Superjewel says, can you ask TLO if it's good to go a Mutacorruptor hybrid style with heavy Zerglings into Broodlords?
I mean, definitely not on like GM. Like nowadays, it just doesn't work anymore. There's so many things you just die to, and yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. But in lower leagues, it can probably be really good. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't really see it work like on a professional level nowadays, because first of all, Zerg is like under constant pressure from adepts early on, and even if that doesn't, like, if that's not the case, Protoss is opening Stargate, so getting Mutas out is very difficult. Even like people have become a lot better dealing with Corruptors, because they realize if I just get +2 attack really quickly and the range upgrade, Phoenix actually shred Corruptors as well. So I feel like Corruptor Muta only works if Protoss doesn't know how to play against it. But as soon as Protoss knows how to play against it, it's very easy to counter. And then getting Broodlords out, you know, it's easier, like, because they go range for Phoenix anyway against that. They already have the thingy to make Tempest, so that kind of makes it difficult too.
And even Void Rays, potentially, if they're already fighting the Corruptors, actually overwhelming Void Rays with air units, even with Parasitic Bomb, if they spread the Void Rays out, is pretty brutal. Like, attack upgraded Void Rays versus Corruptors is like, oh my god. Also, there's something to keep in mind, which I think people might not realize, is one of the things at high levels is because you expand so much faster in Legacy of the Void, you get your 3 bases up so early now as all 3 races, right? And then you can get your 4th usually not too hard as well. And one of the big things in HOTS, I feel, and Wings of Liberty, and why these styles worked, is players took a much longer time to get their 3rd. So you could kind of have your mutas out not long after your opponent's taken their 3rd, or they're still securing it even. And you can kind of make it hard for them to secure that big economy. But because both sides tend to just jump straight to like 3 base saturation very quickly at pro level in Legacy of the Void, you don't get as much window to like abuse positioning and screw them up while they're still trying to set up their macro and set up their production. So there's, you know, it's much easier for them to, I think, hit like a gateway timing as you're building the mutas and just kill you, because their, you know, economy's up so much faster, but tech still takes so long to kick in. So your tech, I feel, is kicking in so much later in the game in Legacy than it was in HOTS. And therefore, when you're using a mobile harassment positioning-based unit like Mutas, it just doesn't have quite as much of a chance to kind of get the value done. I think that's a little bit of an obscure concept, but I think that's a fair assessment to say. Do you kind of agree with that, TLO, or do you think that's me kind of pulling crap out of my ass?
No, that's for sure. I mean, like Zerg feels a lot less flexible than Legacy than in Hot Section in a way, because everything kicks in so much faster. And before, the advantage was Zerg like spikes really quickly and then can do all those crazy tech switches and stuff. But now in Legacy, everybody gets to third base pretty quickly, and everybody establishes like their main tech so fast that you can't do that crazy stuff anymore.
Yeah, actually, you know, on this topic, one thing I was thinking, because I was thinking about this whole idea of Zerg starting off a bit slower compared to the other races, but I feel like there's like this point, often when you're about 50 or 60 workers, where you still jump ahead in workers quite significantly, but it's only for a very short amount of time.
But it's not as extreme as it used to be. And
Exactly. Do you think that's kind of like, you know how people say like we struggle to keep up with Terran now, right? Zerg players struggle to keep up with Terran, Protoss players are more on top. And I feel like it's just the way Zerg production works is the longer it has to build up, the more advantages it can get, right? So in HOTS, when you started out with 6, I think it's just the worker change, which is actually what actually hurt Zerg the most in that regard. I think it's okay, and people complain a lot, Zerg can't keep up anymore. I think Zerg's fine because we have actually amazing tech units now which can generally fight very well. Like, we have so many more options open to us. It's not me whining, but it's something which I think objectively you can say that Zerg has less opportunities to abuse the fact that they can drone more powerfully because the worker start is faster and they skip this whole period where they used to be able to start getting those edges out earlier on, start getting those queens injecting earlier on. So it's not just the 3 inject lava, but it's also that.
yeah.
Okay, so one last question to finish up today, guys. There is a question for Puck. And so we've got a couple questions for Puck now, but the first one was, and Puck, you already talked about the idea of if Hydras and Lings can get out and get in an aggressive position, or Hydras especially, you have a big struggle dealing with it. Even if they're not just all winning you kind of have a struggle to get your fourth, have a struggle to get on the map. But there were questions asking, hey Puck, like what would have given you problems? What would have made you feel more pressured in this game? Or in games which you lose, like what looks different?
For the most part, I didn't never really feel overwhelmed. I don't know if it's because he built too many banelings or like the thing is like my style just felt really good against TLO in general. He like normally on King Sejong I just get overwhelmed, like I'm always pressured in some shape or form, and then I eventually just die to lurkers going at my natural rocks. I'm just like, well, what do I do about this? But this whole game I was like on his side of the map, so it's just like I always felt like I was in a good spot. And then I noticed that he never really had any towers like in any of the games, so it's just like I always felt comfortable like picking any position and then going with it because I didn't think he was going to necessarily be completely prepared. So like Zergs that are just always aware of where everything is just really hard to deal with because they'll always be going for that preemptive surround while you're even just trying to get into position. So
I think that's a really good assessment there. Like, just sometimes it's hard to put in exact thoughts, right? Because you're working with incomplete information. Even when you've played players that have beaten you, you're not necessarily always opening the replay and memorizing the exact timing that they do everything in their build. It's often a feeling. It's this somewhat intangible assessment where you say, well, normally the Zerg is just pressuring you a lot more. You feel like they're harassing you, they've got the watchtowers, you can't quite get into the good aggressive positions. But this game, you just felt like you had that kind of momentum. And TLO didn't kind of have the units in the right places, or he just didn't have enough units in general. And I think that's interesting, because it kind of brings us back to what I think me and Dario kind of came to the assessment before. It was like, it felt like maybe we just needed to go back to, excuse me, the initial defense. How do we defend efficiently, or how do we make the opening slightly more efficient? And it's all going to be about those very slight tweaks in order to get that bit of momentum. And the way that kind of cascades and it kind of starts a landslide going, and that's how StarCraft always works, where if you defend slightly more efficiently earlier on, then you've got slightly more units, which means you can have a little bit more map control with more guys out there, so you see where the Warp Prism's coming from, and you just shut it down the next 2 times it pokes in, without it distracting you from your macro or doing any damage. And then, because there's less Warp Prism damage, and you handled the first thing slightly better, you've got more units, so when, you know, say when Puck pushes out into the map, TLO might suddenly be already halfway across the map with this like great flank of Hydras coming out, and suddenly you're kind of shut out of getting into these really aggressive positions. So it's hard to kind of pinpoint exactly what, you know, TLO could have done differently per se, but it's definitely just the Zerg usually will have more map presence. They'll be out there on the map controlling it, and they won't let you get into these aggressive pushes as easily, right?
Yeah, mostly. Like, if you kind of just let a Protoss do what he wants, then you're gonna have a really hard time. Like, even just like the threat of like a Baning drop keeps so many units at home, because it could go into the map natural, it could go into the main, it could go into the third. Like, it's just like you have to have units prepared in every single mineral line, so that already takes a pretty good chunk out of the Protoss army as it is, and it makes like things surrounds a lot easier to do. So.
Okay, cool. I think that's yeah, that's really good. And that's something which players forget is Protoss are working off a skeleton crew, right? You know, you've got your mothership core and not much else for the first 5 minutes of the game. So definitely there's potential not only in TLO's defense and map control, but maybe also putting pressure back on you would have exposed some weaknesses and holes in your build or in your scouting. Maybe a Baneling drop would have got in and just started, you know, shrekking your main base. Maybe a Zergling elevator or something in the dark spot on the left side of your main base would have potentially done well. So there's always many different options in StarCraft, but I think we've done a good job of answering them today. So a big thanks for coming on today, guys. Did you guys want to do any shout outs quickly? Puck?
Just shout out to all my friends and family and my fans, I suppose. I know my mom's watching, which is pretty cool. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
Is your mom really watching?
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. Hey, Puck's mom. And TLO, how about you?
Yeah, thanks for all my stream viewers. I'm gonna be streaming hopefully tomorrow again. Right now I'm feeling a bit awful because of my allergies, but I should be feeling better tomorrow. So go to twitch.tv liquidtlo tomorrow. Like, I'll tweet about it and all. And thanks for having me. So shout out to you.
Thanks a lot, guys, for coming on. Appreciate it. All right, I'll catch you guys later. All right, guys, on the stream, thank you so much for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed today's show. It went a lot longer than I intended, because I feel like it was harder to dissect the issues today. And I think this is a rare opportunity for us to kind of go in and look at the thought processes of these players as they try to solve these problems. So I hope you guys are okay with the show going a bit longer today. I think we got to have a lot more discussion, and I think that's always worthwhile with this format. If there's one show I'm completely happy for us to blabber on a bit longer than normal, it's this one, because we've got these varying opinions from 2 different races talking about the game. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, I find it really fascinating. And it's really nice as well, because I get to bounce my ideas off these guys who are so experienced and be like, wait, do you guys actually agree with this? But then they always point out things as well where it's like, well, sometimes it's not as easy as just coming up with a clear answer. Sometimes they're like, look, sometimes I can't just give a definitive, it's definitely this or it's definitely that, you know. Sometimes it's just things work better against different players. It's hard to always put it into words because StarCraft is such a complex game. Sometimes you just need to feel it out and figure things out as they go. So thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate the support, all of you hanging out. We're going to finish up the show right away. If you're on the stream, though, hang around. I'm going to give away an Abatha code in just a moment. If Bartendus is watching, by the way, I've been trying to message you on Twitch and everything because you won the code yesterday, and it's in your Twitch inbox. You've got an Abatha code. But yeah, I'm going to give one of those out in a moment. So everyone, thanks for hanging out. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll be back tomorrow doing another daily at the normal time. Today's one is always half an hour earlier because we want to do it at a decent time for our European players. So anyway, thanks for hanging out, guys. Don't forget to hug a watermelon, kick a walrus, and of course, punch a cactus to the moon. That's all for now. Goodbye and good night. Goodbye.